Everybody knows there's a problem, even if it's intuitive. May not be affecting them personally, but what about their kids? What about their sister, their brother, their mother who've been decimated by inflation?
Bitcoin solves the problem of fiat, and fiat, I hate fiat more than I love Bitcoin. I love Bitcoin, but fiat is the problem. It's you, it's me, it's the poor guy, it's the poor single mother, it's the orphan children, it's the guy trying to run his small business. It's everybody that you interact with in society is being robbed from
This thing called Bitcoin, right? And if you understand the analogy of it being digital real estate, why on earth are you pricing it 1 month or 2 months after you bought it? What's the point?
When inflation gets to at least a full single digit in a monthly capacity, it then becomes a line item on your cash flow. Monopoly is the best orange pilling game of all time because you learn really quickly what happens in an economy with very steady inflation.
Today I'm excited to have with me Brian DeMint, author of 2 amazing Bitcoin books, Parallel and Bitcoin Evangelism. Brian is also one of the driving figures behind the social networking Bitcoin app called Club Orange. We're going to be covering a lot of ground today, from the future of Bitcoin and the emerging parallel economy to how to orange pill your friends and family, and also the relationship between personal wellness and your Bitcoin journey. Brian, I know I'm going to get a lot from today's conversation with you, and I'm sure the viewers will as well. Really appreciate you agreeing to come on the show, mate. Thanks for being here. How's things on your end?
Oh man, I'm happy to be here. And we were talking a bit offline, and there's definitely a lot of overlap in our backgrounds. But I got to be real with the audience. I think Zane's got a better background in all of the things that I have a background in. So I might be coming to you for some advice on stuff. You've been in the holistic wellness game for longer than I have. I might have been in Bitcoin for a little bit longer, but geez, I mean, yeah, you were doing it. I like to say that I was doing wellness before wellness was cool, but you were doing it before I was. I've been in health and wellness space for about 17 years this year, and I think you're well over 20. So I'm on your coattails, man.
Maybe it comes with age. I'm 53, man, so I'm probably a little bit ahead of you there too. But Brian, why don't we kick off with, I know you're a massive advocate for the social and sovereignty message and the social layer of Bitcoin. If there's one thing that you want people to know about Bitcoin above all else, what would it be?
I don't think that even the message is about Bitcoin. I think it is what Bitcoin stands to undo. For anybody, Bitcoiners get this, and so they're just like, yeah, okay, I got that a million times. But if there's anybody listening to this that hasn't quite been orange pilled yet, or hasn't quite caught the Bitcoin bug yet, it's Bitcoin solves the problem of fiat, and fiat, I hate fiat more than I love Bitcoin. I love Bitcoin, but fiat is the problem. If the money that we had, dollars, yen, rubles, whatever, if that type of government or state sponsored money wasn't as bad as it is, then Bitcoin wouldn't need to exist. And it's kind of like I like to say I'm a messed up but faithful Bible believing Christian. And what Christians believe is that as humans, we are broken and imperfect people. But in order for us to kind of understand the message of the gospel, which is the good news, you kind of need to understand the bad news. If you understand the bad news that you're a broken, messed up person, then Jesus being gracious to you makes a whole lot of sense. And it's the same thing with Bitcoin. It's like, if you don't understand how broken and beat up our financial system is, then you just don't really see a need for Bitcoin. Rather than telling everybody about Bitcoin on day one, I really try to relate to people because it's in their face every day. I mean, people feel the effects of broken fiat systems, but they haven't tied it together. It's the same thing. And I have no worries about saying it talking to you, but in health and wellness, we have friends that all the time, they're like, my kid has this weird allergic reaction. Their skin always has this reddish, itchy rash going on. I'm like, but what are you feeding your kid? Like, hey, like, let's start in first principles. Well, I know these foods are bad. And I know processed foods aren't good for you, but I ate them growing up as a kid and I didn't have this skin rash. So that can't be the problem. It's like, yeah, Yeah, just because something was a certain way when you were a kid and you grew up okay, it doesn't mean that that's good, right? And so, but you see the
Yeah.
problems with eating Lucky Charms or sugary cereal for breakfast is, right? You know that, and so when you kind of relate to people, they're like, yeah, you know what? I actually start to understand what you're saying. We almost just need somebody to shine a light on the obvious things in our life. Like, yeah, I knew this wasn't good. I knew it wasn't good to eat processed foods all the time, but I needed somebody to shine a light for it on it. That was true for me. That was true for me with fiat. That was true for me with health. That was true for me with all sorts of things. Is you kind of had an intuition that something wasn't right, but we as humans, we do a really good job of coping with our circumstances. I think that's a God-given trait that we should be able to adapt to the things around us. Unfortunately, we've also been capable of adapting to really terrible things and accepting things
Mm.
as the status quo. So, uh, I love Bitcoin because it solves a problem of central banks slowly and steadily robbing from every single person in an economy, except for those who are the closest to the printing of the money. It's you, it's me, it's the poor guy, it's the poor single mother, it's the orphan children, it's the guy trying to run his small business. It's everybody that you interact with in society is being robbed from. The analogy I like to use is if we owned a company, if you and I owned a company together and we each had 50-50 stock, and then I started issuing more shares of stock, but say we not 50-50%, but you have 50 shares, I have 50 shares. I issue 100 more shares of stock. You keep 50 shares. You don't have less shares than you had yesterday, but there's now 100 more shares. There's now 200 shares of stock. Your percentage has gone down. You've gotten diluted. And the person who is unsuspecting, they say, "Well, I still have 50 shares of stock, so I'm okay." But I've just been very, very unethical in diluting your stock, and you've just accepted it. You wouldn't, but the figurative you would have. We accept it because we've been conditioned to think it's not a big deal because we look around at other people and they're not heading for the exits. And so I don't want to be the first person to panic over this. But when Bitcoiners come around and Bitcoiners start to raise the alarm bells, that's why it caught on. At one point, I was one of those people that did not raise the alarm bell. I saw the effects of inflation. My parents talked about it when I was a kid. My dad was kind of a gold bug. And so he talked about inflation at the dinner table and those types of things. But I never thought it was that big of a deal. But it was when Bitcoiners came along that they said, you know what, this is actually a really insidious problem. And if you're somebody that cares about the downtrodden and the truly oppressed people, there is an institution that oppresses people more than any other institution in the world, and that is the central banks of every major nation. And that's what I have a problem with. As much as I love Bitcoin, I dislike those things more.
Yeah, I love that. That's a really good way of explaining it, Brian. And so I guess what you were speaking to there in terms of understanding the problem before people are open to the solution. I think there's this saying in Bitcoin, in order to take the orange pill, you first got to take the red pill. And that's kind of what you're saying, isn't it? It's like people need to understand, I guess, what is causing the problem. I think everybody knows there's a problem, even if it's intuitive. They may not admit it, but people know there's a problem, and it may not be affecting them personally. Like, I mean, I know a lot of people who have benefited a lot from inflation. Their house
Yeah.
prices, and they own
Yeah.
vast real estate portfolios.
Yeah.
But what about their kids? What about their sister, their brother, their mother, who have been decimated by inflation? Or their retirement account is, it's just eroding in terms of its purchasing power. What do you think it is that stops people from seeing this? The resistance that people naturally have towards Bitcoin. What do you think it is that causes that?
Well, I think it's a couple things. One of the things that I'm seeing a lot right now, and it was very evident to me yesterday. I don't know how much you were following this, the Jeffrey Epstein files leak, and so people were saying, "Oh, Bitcoin was funded by Jeffrey Epstein, or maybe he was
Yeah, yeah,
Satoshi," and the guys that I know, the people that I know in real life that sent me a DM and said, "Hey, what do you think about this?" They're the same guys that have been trying to get into Bitcoin for years, and they just said, "I'm not going to fall for that. I'm not going to fall for that." The people the people that are so quick to just believe a fake generated document that shows like that Jeffrey Epstein created Bitcoin was such I know there was like some stuff about Bitcoin and Jeffrey Epstein in the files or whatever, but there was a lot of fake generated stuff that was like more direct as far as his involvement with it that wasn't true. And the people that are so quick to believe that were guys that they felt like they missed a boat with Bitcoin, and they felt like they missed a boat repeatedly. So I think some of the biggest detractors, they almost have this sunken cost fallacy. And for anybody that's not familiar with sunken cost, if you've ever worked on a business, say you're going to do a new marketing campaign and you need to generate more customers for your business, and you spent $1,000 on ads and it didn't work. And so you said, okay, well, I could cut this program and I lost some money, but I could just cut my losses and be done. Or you could say, no, I can't afford for this program to fail, so I'm going to put another $1,000 into it. Well, it failed again, another $1,000. So you end up putting more money before you eventually just have to cut ties anyways because the program doesn't work. But sunken cost is this desire to keep chasing something that you know isn't working. And you do it because you just kind of don't want to come to terms with the fact that it's broken or that it's not working. And so it's the same thing kind of in reverse. There's almost this sunken cost fallacy that they've put off getting into Bitcoin for so long. They knew you told them about it at $1,000 and $5,000 and $15,000 and $20,000. Every one of those times felt too expensive for them. And so they never did it. And now it feels even more it's crashed 75,000, which they would still be out way ahead had they gotten in years ago, right? And they know that, and that really hurts them, that even the crashed price of Bitcoin is something that they could have really still been way ahead in. And so I think that there's those emotional factors. So that's the first one. And that's just kind of my personal experience. And that's really coming off the last few days of what I'm seeing. There's been a lot of backlash towards me from my real life friends that haven't gotten into Bitcoin. And so then the other side is kind of what we were talking about at the beginning. And I reference this. It's a psychological experiment that we talk about. I have a whole chapter on propaganda in Parallel. And that's my favorite chapter of the book. So if you're intrigued by propaganda at all, I believe it's chapter 3. I could be wrong on the chapter number, but it's called The Tools of the Puppet Master. And it's just a one chapter, pretty comprehensive outlook on the different forms of propaganda. But one of the psychological studies that was done in the 1960s, and all the best psychological studies, by the way, were done in the 1960s. I think it was a little bit looser on the laws. They were more inclined to give people experimental drugs and stuff. But this wasn't experimental drugs. This is just a social one. It was called the Smoke-Filled Room Study. And basically what they did was they had test subjects, and these people were volunteering to be studied, and they brought you into a room and they gave you a little test. And that's what people thought. They thought it was a psychological eval that they were filling out, and they were in a room of 25 or 30 other people. Well, it turns out that they were the test subject. Everybody else was just an actor, right? And so what they were actually testing was compliance or somebody's ability to act in spite of a crowd. And so what they did was they would pour smoke under one of the doors. And so just a little bit would come up. And a few minutes in, the test subject would notice the smoke. They'd look around. Nobody was panicking. They'd put their head back down. They'd go to work. A few minutes later, more smoke was coming under the door. They'd look around. They look a little nervous now, but nobody else is panicking. Okay, well, like clearly other people must have seen the smoke, but they didn't panic. So a few more minutes pass. A kind of a ridiculous, like a significant amount of smoke is coming from under the door. So the actors at this point have to notice the smoke. Like that's part of the act. So now they notice the smoke and it's pretty bad, but they go back to work. And so when the test subject sees other people, they also notice the smoke. Okay, so I'm not crazy, but they went back to their work. Well, I'm going to go back to my work as well. So what they found over and over as they studied these people is that if that was a real fire and that was the amount of smoke would determine how close the fire was to those people, it was like something like 90% of the test subjects would have allowed, just so that they didn't break any social norms or they didn't want to be the one person that raised an alarm when everybody else saw it and didn't act. Something like 90% of people would have waited to act to the point where everybody in the building would have died. And so it doesn't matter. We think that, if something's important enough, people will go against social norms. People will go against what is status quo or what is ordinary. That's not true. People are very inclined to stay in line and to not disrupt the status quo, to not look like an outsider. I think it was Warren Buffett that said most investors are lemmings. A lemming is an animal, a bird, right? That will follow other lemmings off a cliff, or it'll follow other lemmings to die. Like they'll follow the crowd. And his point was that investors are the same way. People don't mind if their investment fails as long as the market fails as well. Like, that's a crazy thought, is that if the market's down 10%, investors will brag that they're down 10% too, just like the market. Don't worry, we're failing, but it's just like the market. But they're much more nervous about succeeding 10 or 20 or 30% up over the market, because they will be an outsider. They will be an outcast. And so whether it's investing or whether it's smoke coming under a door, people do not want to go outside of the crowd. There's comfort in the crowd, because when you fail with the crowd, nobody makes fun of you. When you succeed against the crowd, you will still have resentment. You will still have people that oppose you, even if you succeed. And so it's kind of, in some regards, a lose-lose situation to be a free thinker, because nobody gives you credit when you're right. They'll actually oppose you when you're right. And when you fail and the crowd actually succeeds in some circumstances, they will let you know that you are an absolute idiot. So people don't want to go that route. And I believe the smoke-filled room is exactly what we have with fiat. People see the signs of inflation. We know that we should be heading for the exits of the fiat economy. We know this building is about to burn down, but we don't want to ruffle feathers. And I think that's exactly why we're in the situation we're in today.
If you're ready to become truly self-sovereign, join my Bitcoin Success Circle. This is my private mentorship community. And inside the circle, you'll get one-on-one coaching from me, access to our 6 modules of recorded training, and you'll be connected with our growing community of like-minded Bitcoiners. This is a really powerful place to be, and everybody who's joined the circle is absolutely delighted that they did. Now, when you join us inside the circle, you'll gain immediate access to our membership portal. And inside the portal, you'll find our 6 modules of recorded training. The first 3 modules I co-host with Mr. Bisha Kadira. He is COO, Chief Operating Officer at Stormrake. Second half of the training, I co-host that with Mr. Tony Yazbek. He is founder of the Bitcoin Way. So all of this is inside the program. I know you're absolutely going to love it and get tremendous value from it. With that said, I'd love for you to join me. You won't regret it, and I'll see you inside the circle. Yeah, and do you think it's a cultural shift that needs to happen, Brian, or is it like people just need to experience like serious pain? You know, I don't know what that looks like, but is it, you know, they can't afford to feed their kids? Is it a world war? Is it the next pandemic, being locked in their house for another 6 months, 12 months, whatever it might be? You know, what do you think is going to be that inflection point where people start to realize, hang on, this thing that we talk about in Bitcoin, this opt out, this life raft, you know, is there a moment coming where you think people will go, well, hang on, this is a viable solution, this Bitcoin life raft? What do you think?
I do have a thought on that. I'm curious though, being in your part of the world with COVID and those, I mean, obviously you guys have gone through a lot of different things in the last few years. Have you seen a lot of people kind of coming over because of the stuff, like to the Bitcoin lifestyle, to the holistic lifestyle? Like, have you seen a shift because of that, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think COVID was a massive wake up call for a lot of people. And I said to you offline that, you know, COVID was the time that I really started diving deep down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, even though, you know, I'd kind of been here since 2018. That was like the catalyst for me. But definitely, particularly people who were in Victoria, which was, I think, the most locked down state on earth. And you guys maybe saw it on the news and things like that. But yeah, certainly a lot of Victorians, they've either left, okay, people who realize, hang on, this is just not right here. What's going on here? There's something more to this. So they've either left, they've looked for solutions to protect themselves. I mean, now there's a lot of other issues looming in that state. It's one of the most indebted states on earth. So they're taxing people to death, like with their real estate portfolios and all of that. They're bringing in inheritance taxes and all this crazy stuff. And I mean, I'm hearing similar stuff in California. where you are, so
Yeah.
maybe you can speak to that too. But yes, the short answer is I think COVID was a massive wake up call for people and a realization that things can change in a moment. I mean, none of us, if you and I had been sitting here in December 2019 and we had said, oh, in 3 months or 2 months, they're going to lock down the world for the next 12, and we're going to have to walk around with nappies on our faces and stand 6 feet apart, we would have thought each other was crazy, eh?
Right.
But look how quickly things can and did change. And so I think now there is an underlying sense that anything can happen in this world. I
Mm.
mean, there's so much going on geopolitically and all that. But what I don't think has happened yet is they're aware of Bitcoin, but they haven't put two and two together and realized that Bitcoin was created to kind of deal with all this chaos, so to
Mm.
speak. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I certainly think that if a big seismic event like COVID happened again, I think that that would be because people are on guard. People go in one of two directions. People go, they value safety over freedom, and that's fine. And then there's the other group that's just like, you know what? We've seen this play before, so they will get the freedom angle of it. I think COVID, in many respects, was a huge blessing in terms of a wake up call for people because the things that we were theorizing about for years about what governments could do and at scale, that was a huge realization for a lot of people. So it was a good talking point. So when I say it was a blessing, there was lots of terrible things that happened. But as far as being able to point to like, hey, we said that this thing could happen this way, um, it did. It was a bedrock of where you can make your arguments. So I think that that would ultimately be good for the adoption of Bitcoin in a real way, and not like somebody going to their ETF and BlackRock and trying to buy more Bitcoin in their ETF, like self-custody Bitcoin. COVID 2.0 would be good for that. Where I think my optimistic outlook, I'm a generally pretty optimistic person. I think my optimistic outlook for Bitcoin and when people will adopt it, I think the metric will be a certain point of inflation. And it's hard to study this through history. I mean, I think a lot of us have studied Weimar Germany. We've studied many of these different hyperinflationary cycles. And a lot of times the histories only report kind of macro events. They don't really report like what did it feel like on this day in history when you're early in the inflation? Like when you were just kind of like high inflation, what was that like? I
Yeah.
think the biggest shifts in behavior for actual people is when inflation, right now, inflation, let's say it's 5% for the year. I think we as Bitcoiners, we would say it's much higher than that, but that's like the stated inflation is like 2%. But most people, even people that are like regular normies, will say it's got to be at least 5%. It's much higher than that, but that's what they'll agree to. 5% is only less than 0.5% of inflation per month. People don't think in terms of annual expenses. Nobody budgets. Regular people don't budget for the year. Very, excuse me, very few people budget for the year. I'd say
Yeah.
99% of people don't. A lot of people do either budget monthly or they feel the cash flow pinches on a month to month basis. And people are aware of what they spend on a monthly basis. I believe that when inflation gets to at least a full single digit in a monthly capacity, it then becomes a line item on your cash flow, right? And so
Mm.
if I make $5,000 a month and I have 1% to spend on this and 5% to spend on this, and I spend 30% on my house or whatever it happens to be, my mortgage, or people understand what percentages of their income goes to certain things. When you have a line item, right now it's like in the miscellaneous file. Inflation doesn't register on your monthly cash flow. But when it registers on your monthly cash flow, you're going to have a lot of really fed up people. They're like, wow, this is a problem. And guess what? Last year, it was 1% of my monthly income. This year it's 2%. Wait, so it's doubling? Like it's not like it went from 1 to 2% and that was a 1% increase. People are going to say it's double of what the expense it was last year in my monthly cash flow. That is intolerable. And these Bitcoiners, they seem to have a solution to it. I think it'll make gold more appealing, silver more appealing, and I think it'll make Bitcoin more appealing to those people because it will then be very real. And the optimistic thing, the reason why I think that's optimistic is because I think that's still relatively early on. It will increase the rate of inflation though, because when people exit dollars for Bitcoin or gold, that might that might be a problem for the dollar. It weakens the dollar even further. And then that will be kind of like a flywheel effect of then it goes to 3% or 4% or 5% in a monthly capacity. And so to me, that's the most logical way. And again, I'm just trying to put pieces of the puzzle here. It's not really rooted in history. It's kind of rooted in assumptions, but I think it's kind of like on its face, that makes sense that when we feel something in our monthly budget, it's different than when we budget for the year. We can tuck things away in all sorts of creative accounting ways mentally, but when it's
Yeah.
something that takes away from something you want to do, I get one less coffee this month, or I get one less date night out with my wife, or whatever it happens to be because of inflation, now I'm pissed off. Now things need to change.
Yeah. Or the price of eggs all of a sudden, they've gone from $7 to, I don't know, $12, then that's something you really notice, right?
Right.
And that's, I agree with that. I think it's, in terms of people being attracted to Bitcoin for the cost of living thing, I think we haven't yet seen inflation become significant enough in day-to-day expenditure, even though when you look at, say, house prices, as an example, and I'm sure it's in the same, where you are, but, here since COVID, essentially house prices have doubled. So for people who were out of the housing market, in December 2019, now they can only buy half the house that they could have back then.
Yep.
But their wages haven't doubled, right?
Yeah.
And everything around them's gotten more expensive. Yeah.
Yeah. I was talking to my mom about this the other night because I play Monopoly with my kids a lot. And I tried it. Like, I believe Monopoly is the best orange pilling game of all time because you learn really quickly what happens in an economy with very steady inflation. Because what happens every time you go around the board? Inflation happens, right? Everybody gets $200 every time you pass go. And if you land on the free parking, the way we play is like you get $500 for landing on free parking, right? So this constant inflation is happening. Watch what happens to asset prices in the game. And my 7-year-old understands this now, which is really fun. Now, my 12-year-old, my son, he loves cash and he loses every time. He loses to his younger sisters all the time because he loves having as much cash as possible. He'll miss out on deals to keep cash. He likes to have as many $500 bills as possible. He likes to have a lot of 50s, right? His goals in that game are not in line with winning the game. He does what feels good because it feels good to have a lot of cash. But when you buy assets and you get out of cash in Monopoly, as more inflation happens in the game, the property that you bought for $150 early in the game, you can use in a deal worth like $1,500 or $2,000 later in the game because the inflation of the game has raised the asset prices. And so it's very helpful when you can see that in a 2 or 3 hour game of Monopoly. I don't know how long you guys play Monopoly for. It takes forever in my house. But in a 3 hour game of Monopoly, I tell my kids at the beginning, all right, just remember what you paid for that on this deal. Like you basically gave him the value of twice what he paid for that property right now. It's early in the game. You're going to pay 5 times more later in the game. Pay attention to that. My kids, they understand that. That's how you win Monopoly, is by being the best at beating inflation and using inflation to your advantage through the use of assets. So to your point exactly, there are the haves and the have-nots. And now the big players are entirely in these assets and they don't get affected by inflation at all because they actually get to dictate the velocity of the printing and stuff. So there are people that have even greater advantages, but the people, you and I, we understand this as well. So we can play this game of Monopoly and we can do better than the average person because we understand that the game's not about holding the most $500 bills. The game is about owning assets, and then the cash flow will come from those assets. It's pretty simplistic, and it feels almost as like we should explain it more, but sometimes we just need to cut it off because it's like, that's it. Just go play Monopoly and pay attention to asset prices.
Yeah, no, I love that. And the sooner you start your kids getting their head around that kind of stuff, the better, right? And my kids are a little older than yours. I've got 3 daughters in their 20s, and they've watched us invest over the years, and we've been big into property and all of that because it's been the Australian way, right? The great Australian dream, the great American dream is to own your own home and use that as a base to invest in other assets and all of that. The problem is that this next generation coming through, they're starting to realize that unless they do something seriously out of the box, the chances of them living that dream is very, very small, because they're starting to see, well, how on earth am I going to save for a deposit or a down payment for a property when it's going to take me 7-10 years to get there? And by that stage, the house I want to buy is doubled, right? And so it's just, they can just they actually feel it, and, we have gatherings with my daughters and their friends, and you talk to them and no one's thinking about buying a house, which basically means they're not thinking about having kids. So the impact of this is more than just wealth creation and all of that. It actually has a ripple effect into the whole construct of society and us procreating. And I was listening to a statistic the other day that the average age of women in Australia having children now is now 32 years old.
Really?
And they're only having one.
Wow.
So,
man.
So you start to project this out over the next 20 or 30, 50 years, what happens to the country? You kind of lose the whole fabric of society. And it all comes back to, like we said, Brian, like the money is kind of at the center of all this, right? Because people are working harder for less. Not only does dad have to work now, but mum has to work too.
Yeah.
Right. And then now and quite often they've got to keep their kids home to help pay the mortgage. So the whole thing is just, it's just gotten way out of hand. And if people could only see that Bitcoin is a way for them to protect and preserve their economic energy in a way that actually is deflationary, meaning that the longer you hold it and the more you allocate to it over time, things like houses, they get cheaper. They don't get more expensive. So I spend a lot of time kind of trying to educate people from that standpoint, because it's a language a lot of Aussies understand. When you start pricing your house and property in Bitcoin, and you notice the truth, they're going up in dollars, but it's an illusion that the true value of that real estate is going up. What's really happening is that they're just creating more and more currency, right? And that's being absorbed into the property market. But if you start pricing it in a really hard form of money, which is what Bitcoin is, what do you see? You actually see the truth, and that is that your real estate is being demonetized by pricing it in the hardest form of money we've ever seen. So, it's interesting stuff. I'm glad your kids are into Monopoly. It was certainly a game I loved as a kid. But I can't move on without just sort of touching on the book you've got over your left shoulder there, Bitcoin Evangelism. Why did you write that book? Is that really to try to educate people on the basics of Bitcoin and the common questions that are asked?
Yeah, it started out, quite honestly, as this was probably just post-COVID in like 2021, when there was a lot of people. Bitcoin price was doing okay, but there was just a lot of inquiry. There was a lot of enthusiasm in terms of people wanting to know. And then it was people in my personal life. I mean, I didn't really work in the Bitcoin space or anything at that time. It was just like entrepreneur business guy. But in my local friend group, I was like the Bitcoin guy. It was the local Bitcoin guy, and people were coming to me asking questions, or I would get guys, and I'm sure this happens, like when the Bitcoin price runs up, Bitcoiners know, you get messages from guys that you went to high school with, you haven't talked to in 20 years. You get messages from friends of friends. Hey, I'm friends with Jeff. He said that you know about Bitcoin. Can you explain Bitcoin to me over text message? Like, it's like, no, I can't. I'm not going to explain Bitcoin over text message. I tried to. It's just too tedious of a process. So after having seen this, I had seen this in previous bull cycles, in like the 2017 bull cycle. I'd kind of gone through this, but I was willing to take the time at that time to sit down with people. So I'd say, yeah, let's grab some coffee. But by 2021, it was literally unmanageable. I mean, there was so many people asking for help that I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to write a 5-page PDF. Frequently asked questions. Most of these people were asking the same thing, and these are just going to be bullet points. Well, the 5 pages turned into 10 pages. The 10 pages turned into 20. And when I got to 20 pages, I was like, you know what? This is actually very fun to write on, and I'm really enjoying this process. And there's actually a million other questions that I would like to answer within Bitcoin. And so it just turned into a book. I thought, it was meant to be a resource for me to help me save time and to orange pill people a little bit more effectively. I'm like, you know what? Why don't I just put this on Amazon? Nobody's going to buy it. It's just going to be, I'll tell somebody when they ask me questions, I'll say, here's a book that I wrote just to answer questions to you. And I'm going to sell, 25 of them, and it's going to go to friends and family, and it's going to be helpful. Cool. And then it ended up selling a bunch of copies, and I got to go speak at conferences, and it you don't make a bunch of money. You're not going to get rich selling books. Even if you sell a lot of books, unless you're selling Harry Potter, you're not going to get rich from it. So if anybody's planning to write a book, make sure you're going to do it as a labor of love and a contribution to the Bitcoin space. And that's all it was. There's lots of great books out there that explain Bitcoin. I did it in my way. Other people will do it in their way. But there is something I think powerful in being able to tell people that, hey, I've read through and thought through these questions that you have about Bitcoin, and here's what convinced me of it. And that's essentially what Bitcoin evangelism is that we can answer the same question a bunch of different ways, but why was this convincing and compelling to me? Well, if you think like me, this is going to answer that question for you. And that's what Bitcoin evangelism was. I think the best resource of the book is at the back of the book. It has there's 2 chapters at the back. One is common questions to Bitcoin, or short answers to common questions, and then short answers to uncommon questions. So like the short answers to common questions, the first one is, well, why won't Bitcoin be like MySpace, and then the altcoins will be like Facebook and they'll disrupt MySpace, and why not that, right? So that's a very straightforward question. You get that all the time, and that I point most people to that section of the book because it's going to answer their quick questions. And then in the uncommon questions of Bitcoin, it'll be like for my Christian friends that are like, well, is Bitcoin the mark of the beast? Is it the money from Revelation, the one world currency that the Antichrist is going to use to enforce enslavement on the populations? And so, some of them are fun questions. Some of them are practical questions and things like that. But it's definitely, I think, a good read from that standpoint. So yes, it was meant to be a contribution for my local friends and family because I thought Bitcoin was that important. I was on the elder board or the deacon board at my church at the time. And so I was trying to orange pill them. Kind of did. We rewrote the bylaws of the church. So having the book actually was like the official stamp. It does change it. Anybody can post a book on Amazon. Anybody can publish a book on Amazon. So I do think that there's value in if you can take the time to write a book, don't have AI write it for you because it's going to be garbage. Write a book, short or long. If you want to orange pill your friends, it is an arrow in your quiver that you can use. If you wrote a book and you went through the thought it took to write and articulate your points and then publish it on Amazon, it doesn't cost you anything to publish on Amazon. Put a book out there and use that to orange pill your friends. They're more likely to read a book that their friend wrote than to read a book that's by some brilliant economist. The really genuinely deep thinkers will read von Mises and all that kind of stuff. That's fine, but they've probably already done that. The regular person, they might humor you if you pressure them into reading your book, and you can orange pill them that way. Be like, hey, it would really mean a lot to me if you would read my book and then write a review on Amazon. And they're going to go through and they're going to read a Bitcoin book, and you can kind of subversively orange pill them that way. But it did with my church. We rewrote the bylaws. We now accept donations in Bitcoin, and any donations we get in Bitcoin, we hold. The church isn't, unfortunately, actively buying and holding Bitcoin. I was a little disappointed about that, but we do hold the Bitcoin contributions.
Oh, awesome stuff. So guys, read Bitcoin Evangelism. And I know one of the philosophies, Brian, is all about kind of planting little mini seeds, isn't it? And sort of not trying to overcomplicate Bitcoin because of the various rabbit holes that are associated with it. I heard you recently talking about, just leading with, say, the scarcity and the 21 million and simple things like that, which can just help people to kind of open the thought process and kind of lead to conversations where people start asking questions. So it's I think the more resources people tap into, like your book, mate, the better. So hopefully the viewers will take the time to read it.
Yeah, thank you. And hopefully I do think it is valuable as a resource for somebody who is a Bitcoiner already. I mean, so I am making the pitch. If somebody's watching this podcast and they're like, yeah, I've read Bitcoin books. And if you've read Bitcoin books and you understand Bitcoin, that's great. But we don't always have ways to articulate Bitcoin. So I think that's the value to the existing Bitcoiners. If you are looking for a book to read, we try to make practical, simple examples. Like one of one of the ones that comes to mind right now is that like I have a lot of older family members and they're like, well, I could never trust my money to an algorithm. I just can't. My life savings on the blockchain. What is this? It's on the internet. It could be stolen at any time. Can't trust the algorithm. And the example I use for those people, and this is what I wrote in the book, is, you know, your response should be to a person like that is you trust algorithms all the time with something far more important than your money, and you didn't even realize it. And so when was the last time you drove through an intersection with your spouse and your children or your grandchildren in the car, and you drove through the intersection going 40 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, and you were talking, singing a song, listening, doing whatever, but you were not worried that you were about to die in a flaming car wreck when you went through that intersection? Well, you went through that intersection so confidently because you just trustlessly went through and trusted the algorithm. So trustless means it's just like, I don't even have to trust that the sun is going to rise in the morning. Like, yeah, I am trusting that the earth's going to rotate, but it means it's like, it
It
doesn't
just
matter if
is.
you trust it or not. It
Yeah.
just is, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
the algorithm works because, and I trust it implicitly because when I'm going north and southbound are getting a green light, I trust inherently that east and westbound are getting a red light. And that's why I can go through confidently with the most valuable stuff in my life. I can put it all on the line driving through this intersection based on an algorithm because it works. And that's what Bitcoin is. It's an algorithm. It's not that complicated. If I'm A and you're B and I want money to go from A to B, that's all it's going to do. At the end of the day, nobody can stop A going to B. And that's why it's beautiful. Oh, and by the way, those units that A and B are sending back and forth, there's only 21 million of them. If you understand nothing else about Bitcoin, that's what it is.
Yeah, beautiful. And I do want to jump into that in a minute here. Just the emerging parallel economy and how you recommend people start to think about that. But just before we move on to that, Brian, what do you think right now? What's your feeling on this recent pullback? We've seen Bitcoin come off about 100 and I think 123, 124K, down to just under 80. I think it might be even 75 today.
I think so.
Yeah. So, I know people who bought into Bitcoin at sort of around 120 and they're sort of starting to feel a little nervous and uneasy. Not so much that they want to get out of Bitcoin, but they're feeling a little bit, um, discombobulated, if you like, as to, have I done the right thing here? Should I be buying more at this pullback? What's your kind of advice or the mental model that you would recommend people have around this?
Yeah, I think that that question that said people should I buy more when it's down. It depends on your conviction, but I would say what's one of the things that's frustrating you right now is that you feel like your average price of buying Bitcoin is 120,000. Well, guess what? If you buy at 80,000, you buy the same amount that you bought at 20,000, 120,000. Guess what? Your new average price is 100,000. So you just dropped your average buy price overnight. So hopefully that makes you feel a little bit better because now instead of having to get back up to 120,000 to break even, you actually only need to get to 101,000 to break even. You're a lot closer than you think on that. So creating some very like low-hanging milestones there is helpful. But again, you're talking to somebody that has high enough conviction to maybe buy in again, and they might be worried that with Bitcoin they're dealing with a sunken cost fallacy, like we're talking about, right? Like, am I just chasing bad money with good money? And so certainly I understand that. And so what I would say to that person is why you should have high conviction is because the things that were true about Bitcoin at 120,000 are every bit as true at 75,000. The dollars that you measure Bitcoin in are continuing to go up, and the amount of Bitcoin is staying the same, right? We know that more gets mined every 10 minutes, and there's going to be 21 million, but let's just assume that all 21 million are in circulation right now. Bitcoin is going to stay the same. Dollars are going to continue to go up. When you measure Bitcoin, 21 million, by infinity, that equation always works out the same way. The denominator continues to go up, right? The denominator stays the same, but the value of each unit of the denominator goes up. And so I would just say that they might counter by saying, well, more dollars have been printed and the price of Bitcoin is going down. Okay, that's great. That's why Bitcoiners always talk in terms of long-term price predictions. Most Bitcoiners will be hesitant to give a short-term prediction. Short-term markets are dictated by emotions. Long-term markets are dictated by fundamentals. And so I can scare anybody into giving me their money, right? Like I can put a gun in somebody's face and scare them. But if I tell somebody, hey, a year from now, I'm going to put a gun in your face, like they're going to be okay. They're going to be prepared to deal with the long-term implications of fear, but most people aren't prepared to deal with the short-term implications of fear. So short-term markets dictated by emotion, long-term markets dictated by fundamentals. What's the fundamental here? Again, Bitcoin is fixed, dollars are infinite. That's the equation.
Yeah. Yeah. And people get fixated on this short-term price volatility because they've got an app on their phone, right? That they're paying attention to. But, what I kind of like to also remind people of, Brian, is that if Bitcoin is digital real estate, and I know it's a lot of other things, but a lot of people frame it as digital property, digital real estate. Michael Saylor's famous for using that term a lot. If you buy a house today and you try and sell that house in 12 months, there's a really good chance that you're going to lose money, right? I mean, we don't price houses. When we buy a house, what are we doing? We're actually buying it for the long term. Nobody buys houses as an investor, even if it's not a house you intend to live in. Nobody buys a house with a 12-month time horizon, right? Or 6-month. I would say even 2 years, 3 years. Most people who buy real estate, they know they're in for the long haul. And when you consider the ins and outs, the costs of buying real estate and the realtor fees, the agent fees and taxes and everything withholding it, it's just like, okay, well, now you've got this thing called Bitcoin, right? And if you understand the idea or the analogy of it being digital real estate, why on earth are you pricing it 1 month or 2 months after you bought it? What's the point? Because you're not going to sell it. The only reason to sell it is if you need the money today, but otherwise there's no point in selling it. And so I guess it's really a mindset, isn't it, Brian? Just understanding that Bitcoin is a long game. It is repricing the assets in the traditional system, but that happens over time. And if you just snapshot 6 months or 12 months or 2 years in Bitcoin, you're going to see those ups and downs. But if you zoom out and you look at a Bitcoin price chart since January 2009, what do you see? I mean, it kind of looks like that, doesn't it? With all, So yeah, it's just a game of patience and people realizing that, it's kind of messes with your head if you just get fixated on these short-term price movements, and to understand that Bitcoin is kind of an emerging asset, isn't it? It's only 16 years old. It's still really in price discovery. Would you say that?
Yeah, it sounds crazy to people that an asset that's over $1 trillion and each unit is worth, tens of thousands of dollars, that still is being repriced and there's market, there's price discovery. Yeah, but it is. It's just a new asset. We haven't seen anything like this before. And so society's trying to wrap their head around it. Amazon, one of the most valuable stocks in the world. There was a time when it was very, very volatile and it was young and people didn't know how to price it. And there was a lot of risk with buying Amazon because they weren't profitable. And so why would you buy why would you buy Amazon stock? They're not paying dividends. They're literally just reinvesting all of their capital into infrastructure. Well, guess what? They've become the biggest retailer in the world. They sell more goods than anybody else in the world because they've spent decades building infrastructure. And so it's just like anything. If you want to be average in investing, then do what average people do. And average people get scared with their money. They do the safest thing, the least risky thing. But that's why entrepreneurship has always outpaced the S&P 500, general stock markets and things like that. Because if you're willing to take the risk on yourself and bet on yourself, the upside of that is very, very volatile, but the upside is the most valuable thing you can do, right? And so Bitcoin it's a bet on people, because Bitcoin, it's software, it's code, it's zeros and ones. And so yes, there is this price discovery is maybe not the word I'm looking for here, but there's almost this proof of concept in terms of, are the Bitcoiners, is this really transforming society? Is this really going to transform society? Like, are we really going to go away from central bank currencies to a fixed money standard? Like, is that possible? Or can that coexist with fiat systems. I mean, people, even really smart people, are trying to work through this. But what I would say is that history shows that society at points will always crave fixed money or more sound money systems. Anytime, the guarantee we have in money is that fiat money will always die. And it always dies in hyperinflation. And 100% of fiat currencies fail. Go back to the dawn of time. Anytime there's been a fiat form of money, it always dies. People always abuse it. And so what happens in the dying days, in the 11th hour of those fiat currencies? How do countries continue to exist? Because the countries, I mean, a lot of times the country continues to exist. Or for example, in the case of like the Soviet Union, Russia exists, right? There's something similar. There's some sort of similar entity to that country when the fiat currency dies. Well, what do people do in the meantime when one currency dies? And then what happens? Because they have another form of money at some point, they always go to the most sound form of money they have available access to. And so in Weimar Germany, when you had the Reichmark, which was the one that was inflating, right? The one that went from, you could buy, for $4, for 4 Reichmark, for 4 mark, you could buy a loaf of bread. But then a couple years later, it took like 4 trillion marks to buy a loaf of bread. That currency, the Reichmark, when it was dying, what did the German government do, or the Weimar government do, to kind of temporarily fix that problem? They created the Rentenmark. It was a fiat, it was a land-backed kind of form of currency that they said there's only a certain amount of units because it's backed by the amount of land we have. We don't have many resources, but we do have land, so we can back it with land. And so you guys as a society, Germans, you guys can either use the Reichmark, the one that's hyperinflating, or you guys can use the Rentenmark. Use either one, that's fine. Both are considered for use in taxes and all that kind of stuff. And the government, they did keep it fixed for a while. People naturally went to the Rentenmark. They went to the new currency, the sound money currencies. We have historical precedent. Every time hyperinflation happens, there's always going to be the hyperinflating currency, and then there's going to be a more sound form of money. Sometimes it's another fiat currency, sometimes it's gold and silver, sometimes it's salt. It can vary whatever the sound form of money is, but when those two things run side by side, people will naturally gravitate to the sound form of money. So Bitcoin is just lying here in wait, waiting for countries around the world's central bank currencies to fail. And those currencies will fail. Right now, they're failing into dollars. US dollars are like the Rentenmark. They're like the German currency that's not hyperinflating, but it's better. It's the more sound form of money. But at some point, the dollar itself will have to fail. We see it aging. It's a senior citizen right now. It's sick. It's infirm. The signs are on the wall, but not everybody believes it, that it's going to happen. And so that's why it continues. The faith in the US dollar is continuing, but that will wane at some point. And when that wanes, it has that sound form of money has to exist somewhere where to which dollars will go to, which that economic power will go to. I believe it's Bitcoin. A lot of people say, well, the price of gold and silver means it's going to go to gold and silver. If you understand the history of gold and silver, you'll understand that that's been tried before and it does not work. And especially in a digital, virtual economy like we have today, gold and silver, that is absolutely crazy if you think that gold and silver will satisfy that need. It has to be a native currency to the internet. It has to be a digital form of money. And Bitcoin, of all the digital monies out there, which there's a lot of them now, the ones that came after Bitcoin, the CBDCs and all, or not CBDCs, but the stable coins. Yeah. All of those ones, Bitcoin is the only one that has the qualities of sound money that everybody has access to. We're even seeing this right now. I think that part of the reason why the silver and gold prices dropped was because I had friends that went and tried to sell some of their silver. With Bitcoin, you have real price discovery. You really know if the price of Bitcoin is $75,000 today, I know that I could sell my Bitcoin if I needed to for $75,000. I had friends that tried to go sell their silver, and the silver dealers were only willing to pay them 30% under what the market was paying that day. So when silver was at $100, the actual sale price, you could sell it for $70, which for a lot of silver bugs, that was a huge price appreciation, but it wasn't what it was being advertised. It wasn't what it was on paper. So with gold and silver, there's this lack of connection to reality because it is not digitally native. The exchanges for gold are not online. I mean, there's gold brokers and things like that, but you're not buying and selling gold in that regard to use it for transactions. You're buying to hold it or whatever. So all that to say is Bitcoin has true market validity. You know, if the price of Bitcoin is crashed as it is at 75,000, that you can actually spend it with the value of 75,000, because if I went to go spend my gold today and my economic dollars were based in silver or gold, I couldn't rely on the fact that what people are telling me the market price is what I could actually buy goods and services for. With Bitcoin, you can. That's why it's going to win in that scenario where dollars will inevitably die. They have to go to a sound money, and that sound money will be Bitcoin. I firmly believe that that's the case.
Yeah, no, I'm a great believer in that too, Brian. I think this is a really good segue just to, as we enter the back end of this conversation, mate, to talk about what you see in terms of the emerging parallel economy. You wrote the book Parallel. You're a great believer in the social layer, having, being a key figure behind the Club Orange app. Where do you see this going? I mean, you have wellness studios as well in California. And I've heard you talk about before how you actually offer your customers the opportunity to pay in Bitcoin. Do you think we're far off Bitcoin being utilized commonly as a medium of exchange? What would you say?
Yeah, unfortunately, I do feel like we're a bit further off than I was hoping. I think it was part of probably the inspiration for writing the book was because I was an advocate of, of the parallel economy of spending your Bitcoin. And I knew that when I tweeted about spending your Bitcoin, the most pushback I ever got was anytime I would say, we should spend your Bitcoin. People were like, why would I do that? Stack sats and hold and,
Yeah.
chill or whatever. And so I got even more pushback when I wrote the book, because now here's like a fixed piece of intellectual property that's saying, hey, we should spend our Bitcoin. And to a lot of Bitcoiners, that feels kind of antithetical to what they're supposed to do. And again, it's not a prescription for everybody. If your goal is just to store and maintain value, that's not what who I'm trying to tell. But if we want the effects of Bitcoin, if we want the transformational things that come with a sound money system, I don't think Bitcoin fixes everything, but I think better money does fix a lot of the systemic problems in society. I think that this is one of the things where a more liberal-minded people, where more progressive, politically minded people, they talk about oppression and a systemic oppression. I think that they're pointing a lot of times to the wrong parts of the system. They're right. There is systemic oppression. It's from the money. And if you think that pharma is corrupt, and if you think that the media is corrupt, and if you think that police forces are corrupt or whatever, is it not kind of like obvious that the money people are corrupt? Like the people whose business is money. If you're saying that every industry is corrupt, why wouldn't the most corrupt industry be the money industry? Like that's where, if I'm a greedy pig, that's the one, and I have ultimate power to control anything, I'm going to try and control the money. And so if we can fix that system, I think we fix the most things. And so that's why I advocate for a parallel economy. But I think that a lot of Bitcoiners, unfortunately, are very happy with the BlackRock ETF buying up Bitcoin and Michael Saylor buying up as much Bitcoin as he can and those types of things. We get really excited when Michael Saylor buys more Bitcoin, but we get mad when somebody tells us that we should go pay for our haircut in Bitcoin. It's like, to me, that might be a symptom within Bitcoin that we're a little apathetic, we've done some of the heavy lifting, but perhaps we're not willing to take the ball across the end zone. And here's the thing: it's like, if your goal is to stack more sats, this is one of the things I talk about in parallel. And there's a weird paradox that happens when you start to spend money in Bitcoin, you start to spend sats in the Bitcoin economy, you will stack more sats. It seems like that's not the case, because you're asking me to spend my Bitcoin. I don't want to have less Bitcoin. I want more Bitcoin. Well, what happens in the fiat economy? If you're playing the game right in the fiat economy and you have a job and you have expenses in fiat, at the end of the month, hopefully you're saving more money than you're spending. Like that's the goal. Like if you're doing it right now, if you don't have that part of it, then that's a whole other issue. And okay, I understand that inflation's tough and there's all sorts of reasons why maybe your cash flow negative at the end of the month. But for most people, we survive because we have a little bit more at the end of the month than we started with. And if you're doing that in sats, if you pay for stuff in sats, guess who you find? you find people who also pay in sats. And you also have goods and services that you sell in sats. You have expertise. You have something that you do. Whatever people pay you fiat for, somebody will pay you Bitcoin for. And the more people that you transact with economically in Bitcoin is going to open your network up to more people who pay and interact in Bitcoin. And so I think that if you want to be ahead of the curve, if you want to be ahead of the next phase of Bitcoin, adopt Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. If you adopted, I don't know if you've heard me talk about this before, but I talk about this at a lot of like conferences and stuff when I do get to do keynotes. Money has 4 phases. There's the novelty phase. So when it starts out, people just treat it like a collectible. Then there's the store of value phase. Then there's the medium of exchange phase. And then there's the
Unit of
unit
account.
of account. Thank you.
Yeah.
So there's those 4 phases. And historically, anytime in Bitcoin that you treated Bitcoin today as if it's in the next phase, you came out way, way ahead. So go back to 2011. In 2011, when Bitcoin was clearly a tchotchke, it was clearly a collectible, it was clearly novel, it was new. People didn't know how to price it. People were paying for pizzas in it and all sorts of stuff, right? They didn't know how to value Bitcoin. If you treated it back then as a store of value, you would literally be a billionaire with very little investment, right? And so I don't know if you're going to 1 million X your investment by doing it this way, but I think you will outpace the rest of Bitcoiners. Having Bitcoin is going to make you you're going to come out ahead if you just buy and hold Bitcoin, but you will come out ahead of even Bitcoiners if you begin to treat it as a medium of exchange. You will have more Bitcoiner connections. You will have more sats. You will have more economic power in that economy. And so the people who build economies are the ones who benefit most greatly from it. The people who built the internet economy were like the Jeff Bezoses and the Elon Musks and those guys. And they built not just businesses on the internet, or they didn't just buy and sell domain names. They built the actual economy. And here we are a generation later. And those guys, they're not just wealthy. They didn't just make $15 million. They made, I mean, Elon Musk is worth something like $600 billion. It's absolutely insane. There's something different that happens to your economic power and your economic status when you are an early adopter, not just to the form of money, but when you're an early adopter to the actual economy itself.
Yeah. And look, we can see it already, can't we, Brian? I mean, there is infrastructure being built. Square, Jack Dorsey's company, I think it was, 2-3 months ago, they rolled out Bitcoin payments on their merchant facility app. I think 4.5 million merchants in America. It's not to say that they're all necessarily utilizing it yet, but it just tells you where this is going.
Yeah.
A Steak and Shake, they're a big fast food chain in the States. Have you been to one of their outlets? I'm not sure whether
I
you eat
haven't.
burgers.
They're not where we are. They're not where we are, but if they come out this way, I will be there. I mean, I absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think that the corporations lead the charge here, or do you think it's the consumer? So the people who hold Bitcoin, or do you think it's going to be these merchant facilities? I'm not sure whether you heard, but are you familiar with Theo Von?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. Did you see a couple of weeks ago on his podcast? And for those who don't know, he's got like 7.5 million subscribers and followers to his podcast. But he announced that one of his big sponsors, can't think of the company offhand, but it's a cryptocurrency related company. But he actually announced on his show that he's asked them to pay him in Bitcoin.
Oh, really?
Right, for his sponsorship.
No
yeah.
way.
So when you have these big voices out there starting to make these kind of announcements, and Square and these well-known platforms and apps starting to it seems to me that the big end of town is going to lead the charge, and if businesses can start to actually convert on the back end, because the way I understand it with like Square is you can receive fiat currency, but you can actually set it to actually convert it to sats in the back end. So a business can effectively set up their own Bitcoin savings account or operational Bitcoin account in the back end. And then this could lead to them, starting to utilize Bitcoin for payments, and maybe the whole thing starts to have a ripple out of there. What do you think?
Yeah, I do think so. I believe that the best way to build it is for everybody to be involved. And so if we can have the microeconomies already functioning, then it creates there's going to be a built-in demand layer for when those big companies do it. So what would be a problem, what would be a bummer is if a big company, let's say like what was it, Walmart? I don't know if Walmart actually started accepting Bitcoin payments. I've seen stories saying that they accept Bitcoin and crypto payments. I don't know if that's
Not
true.
sure. Yeah.
I haven't done it. I haven't been to Walmart to try it out or anything like that. But let's say one of the biggest companies in the world, Walmart, does do a rollout, and then nobody spends their Bitcoin there. Is it worth it for them to have these programs? Because surely a company at that size, it's going to cost them something. There's got to be roles in the company. There's going to be salaries that are associated with like that part of their payments within the company. So even if
Mm.
it's only several $1,000,000 per year that it costs a company, and a company of that size, that's not that much money. At some point, if they're not getting any payments in Bitcoin, they will cut that program. And so I think we need to have the microeconomies brewing right now. People need to pay their plumber in Bitcoin, and guys need to pay for their computer repair. And if you can find a place where you can grab a cup of coffee and pay for it in Bitcoin, start to do that now. Start to plant the seeds, like we were talking about the Bitcoin evangelism thing. Start to plant the seeds of the parallel economy now, so that when the big boys do come to town, you can actually start to foster that. You can say, hey, two giant retailers are in town. One accepted Bitcoin and their sales went up year over year, and this guy didn't. The best thing that Steak and Shake is doing is they're not just accepting Bitcoin, they're doing all sorts of programs, and they're bragging. You can believe that their competitors who are seeing like, yeah, we're having 5% year over year growth, but for some reason, Steak and Shake's having 30% year over whatever it is. Steak and Shake's outperforming us. The only thing that they changed is they went to tallow fries and they went to
Instead
Bitcoin.
of seed oils.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
hey, like either one of those is a big win for society. Is like if we can have I eat fast food too much. I'm on the go. I don't plan my time out well. I don't eat it for every meal, but I do eat fast food. I will try to seek out places like that I know that they're a little bit healthier. I can get something quick and I'm not going to have seed oils. And so I will drive out of my way. Even on days where I'm in a hurry, I'll drive several miles out of my way because that is worth it to me. I still need something that's convenient, but man, companies like that, if they can check off a few boxes, they will be able to outperform the people who are just abiding by the way things have always been. We need to reward those companies. The last chapter of Parallel, it's called Every Day is Election Day. And it's not a political chapter. I'm a political guy, but it's not a political chapter. It's that your money is the most important vote you have. And every vote you make with Bitcoin has the power of two, because it is every time you buy something in Bitcoin, it is -1 for the fiat economy and +1 for the Bitcoin economy. So that's a 2-point shift. -1 for the good
Yeah.
guys or the bad guys, +1 for the bad guys or for the good guys. Sorry, one of my kids just walked in. It distracted me a little bit. And so it's a 2-point shift. Very, very helpful for the parallel economy. And we think that our votes don't matter, and we vote in elections, but every vote you have with your money makes a difference. Netflix pays attention to what you click on. What we click on is important. What we do with our time and our focus is important. But what you do with your money is the most direct vote you can do. Every day of your life, you vote every single day, virtually every minute of every day. You're doing some sort of economic vote. So are we voting for Bitcoin or are we voting for fiat? I'm guilty. I'd still place plenty of votes for fiat because it's convenient. It's the way things work. But I try to systematically introduce Bitcoin components to my life as often as I can. I want to reward Bitcoin companies. I want to reward companies that maybe they're not Bitcoin companies yet, but they're doing healthy things. Great. Let's reward the companies that are pushing society in the right, healthier, more constructive way.
Yeah, brilliant. And I just want to probably finish on that note, Brian, because I know that you're into health and wellness. You might eat a bit of fast food, mate, but that's okay. We all do from time to time. But listen, what do you think it is about Bitcoin that kind of attracts people who are right into the wellness movement and alternative health and all of that? What do you think the relationship is there that draws people to Bitcoin?
That's funny. A couple hours ago before this, I was on a call with a couple guys from the Bitcoin conference. So they're reaching out. I've spoken at the Bitcoin conference, but they weren't reaching out because I spoke last year. They were reaching out because they want my wellness company, Salt and Light, to come and set up a booth in their wellness area. So they're actually the
Right.
Bitcoin conference is going to have an entire wellness area
Wow.
devoted to health and wellness because Bitcoiners, you're right. You're absolutely right. It's important enough to Bitcoiners that even on vacation, you need to focus on your health and wellness. But the common denominator there, I think, is very clear. When you've asked what is in your food, you will then ask what is in your money. And if it's something toxic, if it's something dangerous, you're not going to want it in there. And so same thing. Like for me, before I was my wife was very into health and wellness. So she was kind of like the guardian angel for our family in terms of healthy food and that sort of thing. But for me, I was the money side. So for me, it was the Bitcoin thing that opened up my eyes to medical things and food and that sort of thing because it's like what is going on in fiat? Why do we accept this really toxic form of money? My wife is like, yeah, I get it, but like, why do we accept this really toxic form of food? Okay, there's a lot of overlap there. There's ingredients in what I'm consuming that I don't like, whether that's money, food, media, propaganda, whatever it happens to be. There's ingredients that I don't think are good for me. I don't think they're good for my family. I don't think they're good for my neighbors. And so I'm going to try and get rid of those things that are toxically poisoning those around me. It's something I think that we as freedom loving people, we see an injustice and we don't want to stand for it.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I also think that as Bitcoiners, we tend to have that low time preference and we tend to value the future maybe a little more highly than the present in a way. But, and with that, we kind of say to ourselves, maybe even subconsciously, well, this Bitcoin thing, as it evolves and we have this bright orange future, we want to be there to enjoy it, right? Which basically means we want to arrive at that place, whatever it looks like, in a good state of health.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. I mean, yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. And when you have money that you think is going to take you into the future, you tend to be a little bit more optimistic about the future. I mean, it was so sad hearing you talk through it, and it's not the first time I've heard something like that. But when you're talking about your daughter's friends and kind of the hopelessness they have
Yeah.
about, should I even have kids? Should I even have a family? It's like the money is robbing people of the joys of life, not because they can't go out and like buy an ice cream cone and feel happy today. Like fiat will allow you to do that. Fiat will let you go have an ice cream cone to make yourself happy today. But fiat is not going to let you plan very well for 10 or 15 years down the line. And so, yes, Bitcoiners, we think 10 or 15 years down the line. And so we need a money that will get us there.
Yeah. Beautiful. Brian, on that note, I just want to say thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Is there any final messages you want to leave with the audience? Maybe just plug Club Orange, anything like that?
Yeah. Thank you for that. For all the things we've talked about, and I'm an advocate for the Bitcoin economy, for being around other Bitcoiners, the network connections that you have in Bitcoin being probably one of the most important things you can have. That's why we built Club Orange. Club Orange is literally, it's not a social media. Like you can't go viral on Club Orange. You're not going to have a bunch of likes and follows and things like that from random people. That's not the goal. The goal is to help you find other real life Bitcoiners that you can either transact with economically, you can become friends with, you can do meetups with, people that you want to be around in real life or you want to actually know. It's only real people. There's not bots, there's not spam, there's none of that. It's do you want to be a part of this social network? Bitcoin, I think I said it earlier, but at the end of the day, and I don't want to be heretical to Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is just software. It's just zeros and ones, ones and zeros. If the people did not exist, Bitcoin would be valueless. It is the pairing of this technology and the social layer of Bitcoin is what makes Bitcoin. And so don't let Bitcoin be this beacon of hope that humanity had, but then the people just did not participate with it. We did not interact with it. We did not spend it. We did not save it. We did not care for it like we should have. And so Club Orange is a really easy and fun way to make that happen. I've met lots of real Bitcoiners in my neighborhood, in my community. I've gone to meetups with Bitcoiners, and that's the story that we hear time and time again is that I didn't know there was actual real Bitcoiners around me. I've been a Bitcoiner for 5 years. I've been a Bitcoiner for 10 years, for 6 months. I didn't think I was going to be able to ever meet other real Bitcoiners in real life. Guess what? There's a bunch around you, and there's a really easy way to find them with Club Orange.
Beautiful stuff. Brian, thanks again. And I want to say to all of you listening, thanks so much for taking the time to tune in. I hope you got tremendous value from today's podcast and insight from Brian. Such an awesome guy in this space. And if you want to support the content, the channel, the work that I'm doing, please like and share. And also, most importantly, please subscribe. It helps to grow the channel. And when you grow the channel, it helps to attract world-class guests such as Brian DeMitt. With that said, thanks for being here. You're watching Bitcoin with ZT, where real conversations meet real conviction. Bye for now.